Welcome to the Resolution Room, and today I'm talking about how to build better teams. Now, I'm sorry for all those executives in the last 25 years or so who've got together on their great days and written lofty vision or value statement in particular. I'm not saying they're worthless, I don't subscribe to that view, but I think they're entirely overrated. I certainly accept that culture is king and that culture is important, but I'm not a big believer in value statement as traditionally expressed, because I think there can be a real misalignment. I'm a big fan of a guy by the name of Steve Simpson, who wrote about UGRs, unwritten ground rules, as really the defining features of culture. So in other words, when you get to a new place, someone says, well, that's not what happens really around here. The old adage, people are much more interested in what you do than what you say. So that's unwritten ground rules. So let's sort of extrapolate and explore some of these. So, for example, an unwritten ground rule might be you have to be of a certain seniority to speak and have your voice listened to. Well, that's hardly consistent with being an inclusive environment necessarily. Or an unwritten ground rule might be you can complain, but nothing will practically be done. That's also, of course, very much misaligned, no doubt, to the values you may express on your glossy brochures. In my view, when you look at culture, if leaders were to get together and really drill down on what are the unwritten ground rules in their place, and that can be done through surveys and other appropriate questioning, explore them and be open and honest about them, and then align them truly to values and make sure they're aligned, you'd be amazed what difference that makes. So that's the work of Steve Simpson, the UGRs. Another classic one in professional services, an unwritten ground rule, is we tolerate bad behaviour from a high revenue generator. That's been a classic that I've seen as well. So I'm sorry to sound unduly cynical. I do think value statements are important statements of aspiration as a vision statements, but I really would, in the leadership space, ask you to look at the work of Steve Simpson and explore in your organisation what are the unwritten ground rules and are they genuinely consistent with your values. A great motherhood statement, we love innovation or we innovate, and then the unwritten ground rules is if someone speaks up with new ideas, it goes nowhere. And that's maybe what someone will say. And then well, there's clearly a misalignment there. So in building culture, in building teams, and how you live as a leader, is really think about these unwritten ground rules, what really happens. Because people, as I say, are much more interested in what you do than what you say, despite all your best efforts to present your best gloss on your marketing material. That's unwritten ground rules. Now let's look at the practicalities, because when you're building a better team, you're in the game of motivating, or even better, inspiring people. And what does that take? What does that involve? Well, let's break it down to what I consider are the key ingredients. First of all, I think this is really important. In motivating a team as a leader, you need to create a sense of forward motion or momentum. The old adage that progress is intrinsically motivating. And this is for those who are sports nuts that follow Sir David Brailsford and British cycling and the 1% marginal gains theory. We had to do 1% better on something to produce the better results. It goes to the heart of this notion that progress is intrinsically motivating. Because I'm so vain, when I go to the gym, I get a body scan composition. And if the number's bad, you would think that I would go, right, I'm going to get serious about my training and diet. But the opposite happens. I might, pass the wine and chocolate. So what that's about is if I see good numbers, I'm more likely to say, hey, this is great, continue the path. So progress, people need a sense of progress or forward momentum. And your job as a leader is to really clearly map that out. And importantly, to celebrate those little steps of progress along the way. Progress, not perfection. Forward momentum is really motivating. The second key ingredient in managing and building a team is to provide sufficient challenge. People have this thing where they want sufficient challenge to ensure that they progress and develop, but not overwhelm, which tips them over the edge. And so how do you provide a sense of challenge? And that's very specific and individual to everyone's story and journey in professional life. But it's something that you need to be alive to. Don't stay static with people. There's always challenge. And that's why, for example, in often the transition of leadership, once you're quite good at your core technical job, you might be challenging them around clients or building clients or other relationship skills. So there's got to be constantly a lens of challenge. How do you bring out the best in people, not overwhelming them, but by setting appropriate challenge so they grow and develop. Otherwise, let's face it, we'll all stagnate. The third requirement to create a better team is control or agency. I've seen this go so wrong in professional services, particularly in the early days where there was a lot of micromanagement and people, of course, voted with their feet and left places in droves when you have a partner who doesn't allow control and autonomy. A study that I like to cite, which I think is a classic, is a study of the British civil service. It's an early study in workplace. It goes in the 70s and 80s. It debunks this myth that the higher up the food chain you go, the more stressed you are because you've got more responsibility. So what that study found was that those in the lower echelons of the British civil service had worse health outcomes, which was really interesting. And so one of the things that's extrapolated is those people lower had less control or agency over their jobs. And that was, of course, an important feature of motivating people. So in professional services, particularly dealing with university-educated people, always provide autonomy and control and be very wary of micromanagement of people. And of course, even in the psychosocial code, the absence of control and autonomy is recognised as an important psychosocial risk. Now, I accept that in some workplaces it's far easier to have less control, professional services, than, say, a call centre. But even in those examples, you've got to promote as much autonomy and agency within the parameters of the job as you can possibly provide, because it motivates people. And of course, we have this debate, importantly, with flexibility. That's about the question of control and agency and how people want to work. And of course, there's a tension there as well. The fourth important motivating factor that you need to be alive to as a leader is people want a meaningful goal. Now, a meaningful goal may not be as grand as changing the world, addressing climate change, as important as that is, or another grand statement. A meaningful goal might simply be, in professional services, providing a quality professional service, partnering with clients, solving their problems. A meaningful goal for people may just be to become a very good lawyer or accountant or consultant. These are all very meaningful goals about the question of... So you've really got to map out for people in your team, what is your meaningful goal? Is it winning more of this client work? Is it exceeding your clients' KPIs or other expectations? Is it winning more market share? What is the meaningful goal? That's the vision. That's what you really need to work on with your people. And so those are the four factors that really promote engagement. In my leadership work, I'll often ask people, what does a good team look like? Views around the room, we get on really well, we're open enough with each other, we help each other. That's all really important. And I think that is important. But I think we've got to not lose sight of the fact that a good team aims to get better results. It's got to be tangible. So I always challenge people to say, sure, it's great to get on well together, but are you winning more market share? Are you fulfilling your goals? Where do you want to be and why? That's about really what constitutes a good team. And that's important because if you see the world through that lens, you appreciate that there will be conflict, because pushing people and getting better results means that there's going to be some level of conflict, and you can't shirk the hard conversations necessarily. So I sort of debunk the myth at times in a modern workplace that good teams is about just everyone getting together and having pizza and being friends. Good teams are much more than that, of course. It's about pushing people. And that's why we look to examples in sporting teams. Now, I understand that sporting teams aren't analogous entirely, because even the best athlete knows that their time is limited. But we do look at sporting teams because they're unashamedly in a process to win a game, to win a championship, to win a premiership, whatever it is that's being played. And we can take some lessons of that, albeit in a workplace, and bring that into our teams. How are we trying to win and why? In what way are we trying to get our team to have better results? And if you look at the world through that lens, getting better results, ensuring your team gets better results, you're much more likely to not shirk the hard conversations that you need to have to improve performance and results, because that's why you're in the game in the first place, if I could say that. I'm going to tell you now the many mistakes that I've made as a leader that pertain to teams. There's quite a few, so bear with me. First of all, one of the mistakes I've made in the early days was, to quote Jim Collins, the importance of getting the right people on the bus in the right seats. I made the mistake in the early days of hiring friends, which didn't work out, and lost friendships. And so it's really important to remember that when you're running a business, it's like a child. You've got to act entirely in the best interest of the child as a parent, and a business is a bit similar. So you've just got to be alive to that risk. So that's a mistake I've certainly made. The second mistake I've made, maybe this is a bloke's thing, women are much better at this. I've probably mistaken confidence for competence, and they're quite separate. I hired we hired a new partner who was a bit older, who was extremely confident and promised a big game. And my intuition, and this is a good lesson, follow your gut, was that it wasn't all there. And of course my intuition was right, and it didn't last very well or long. Follow your intuition and don't mistake confidence for competence. And the old adage, hire slowly, fire quickly, drill down on those competence questions, particularly in a bubble that is Brisbane, by doing some due diligence and homework, can really pay dividends. And that was certainly a mistake that I made in that instance. Another mistake I made, I haven't entirely assisted people as best I could in the question of what their future holds and in succession and promotion. And I look back at some aspects of my career and think I could have done better there at helping them answer that question and mapping it out in a more certain way. Another mistake that I've made, and this is something that I've arrived at over time, I'm a firm believer that you get more bang for your buck in leveraging person's strengths than you can trying to offset their weaknesses. So really think about in your team what strengths people bring to the table, and really give them roles in which they can really amplify these strengths. Now, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be alive to weaknesses. There are some weaknesses that are very career limiting, for example, and you need to have those conversations if people aren't relating well or if there's undue conflict. Absent those sort of really strong weaknesses that are career limiting, the reality is that I look back now and I think the most important thing is to get people to leverage their strengths in any team. You'll get more bang for the buck. There'll be a better return on investment. And another mistake that I've made over time that I've addressed is I've been a bit too slow to delegate and to get out of my own way. I've had the view sometimes that it's best that it's done by me. And of course that's a fallacy, and you can't build a business that way. So I've really addressed that mistake in the last 10 years of my professional journey to ensure that there was capacity built around me so that I could focus on the key strategic and broader relationship issues. So there you have it. Now there's probably a hell of a lot more mistakes. People who work with me will probably provide a much longer list, but that's some of the highlights here. So that's some of the mistakes that I've made in building better teams. Now, no matter what business you're in, and I think this is a classic quote, I love the work of Steve Bartlett on Diary of a CEO, you are in a people business. Your business is hiring and retaining and engaging if you're growing a business. So I think that's really important to consider, even though you might see yourself as an engineer or some other technician, but if you're growing a business, you're inevitably going to find yourself in the people business. And the reason I mention that is when I coach people and I talk about their pain points or their frustrations, sometimes it might be some clients, but it's almost always people, frustrations with, a co-worker, senior management, someone at their level, etc. So not surprisingly, it's an area where I'm involved quite a lot with people because we are all in the people business. So I hope that was useful, guys. That's about building better teams, how to motivate and how to engage people. And of course, I needed to cover off on just some, no doubt there'll be more, mistakes that I've made in the process. So thank you for listening to today's episode of The Resolution Room.